the clerk or the city
Oh,
attorney?
sure. And I'll clarify for the committee membership to remind us that I did communicate to the clerk and to the members of the committee the singular item that we would be discussing today. I wish I could have done that earlier, but things are moving around quickly. And then for the clerk, can I clarify that the item can be resubmitted to go to the agenda committee for the purposes of scheduling for that special meeting or work session, but that the version of the item within this committee perhaps exists in purgatory on the unscheduled calendar?
I think so. Technically, I would say it was sort of awkwardly done because, as Councilmember Hahn noted, there are really 4 actions that a committee is supposed to take. And my understanding of the discussion at our last meeting was really that my sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that the committee really wanted the item to go before the city council because it is garnering high public interest and it has evolved quite a bit. So that was my sense, is that was what you were trying to achieve, and don't have a lot of leeway. It's either recommend council pass the item or recommend the council reject the item unless it's changed. There's not really an option for we don't think that we are the appropriate forum at this time for this item. So I think, I think it could probably go either way, whether, then of course, Chris being a legal could weigh in, was the motion such that it was insufficient to fully move the item forward, and perhaps the committee could take action today to move the item forward if that was their intention by a qualified positive recommendation or something like that.
Yeah, so as I said earlier, I don't think the action by itself moves the item out of committee. I don't think there's anything in the rules of procedure that prohibits the committee from making a request to the agenda committee as a body. But it would be, so I think it would, be up to the discretion of the committee to decide whether that was appropriate. If the committee is uncomfortable with that process and still believes that, a council work session or a special meeting would be an appropriate forum, another path forward would be for the author to withdraw the item from the committee and make the request to the agenda committee to schedule the council meeting. So that would seem to be a path that's clearly allowed under the rules of procedure.
Right. Informed by the recommendation that the committee has already made to do exactly that.
Yes, that would be something that I would expect the author would discuss with the agenda committee.
Councilmember Hahn, you're recognized.
Well, my concern here is transparency, and there's the letter and then there's the spirit of open government. And let's not talk about the letter. That is the purview of, the lawyers and maybe the clerk or, people who complain or whatever. But as council members, as elected officials, that upholding the letter of open government and Brown Act and all those other, important foundational rules that's the floor of what we should do. That's the bare minimum. The spirit of open government is, much broader than that. And I think that we need to think beyond the technicalities to what actually is fair and open, and what provides real notice to the public and even to each other. What is adequate notice to myself, who had another meeting, and literally there's no tape of what happened, The annotated agenda, I now learn, came out exactly 15 minutes before this meeting. I don't consider that to be an adequate, it was not adequate for me, but certainly not adequate for the public. And I'm just really worried that by kind of doubling, I don't know, keeping, how to say this? I think we've had a lot of questions and concerns about process. And I'm worried that we may exacerbate that today. And I just feel that we should not do that. And I think that we need clarity for the public. And quite frankly, I don't feel that we should take, even if it's to redo or try to redo or clarify, action that the committee thought it was taking on Monday, but that wasn't taken clearly enough. I think the public thought action was taken on Monday. And I think that was a legitimate understanding on their part that this was no longer in our committee. And I think people, including myself, understood that having this on today's agenda was just an artifact. The agenda came out last week before Monday. And I don't think anybody thought, oh, it's being republished, it's a new agenda, this item is still alive. I think people had understood that action had been taken. Of course, they couldn't verify that because there's no tape and no annotated agenda. So I guess my feeling is that I would not feel comfortable, even at a redo of a previous intended action today. I feel that that would compound the confusion and the sort of lack of notice for myself and most importantly, for the public. So I'm very, very wary of that. Yes, it is technically agendized, but I don't think we can reasonably expect the public to have understood that. And I myself did not fully understand it. And Chair Robinson, I did ask you, what would be on the agenda. I have to tell you that I had the assumption when I asked you that this item was kind of dead. You know what I mean? At a committee level, that it was gone, that it had been voted out of committee one way or another. And so I did not understand that it could be potentially an alive item at our committee. So I just think there's too much confusion here. Obviously, if the author can always withdraw it and, that is not an action of the committee.
Right.
And it sounds like the city attorney feels that is allowable and that we could still have the authors could refer it to the agenda committee and ask them to schedule a work session anyway. I just want to say that I do not feel comfortable as a committee taking any action on this today, whatever it might be.
I appreciate that. Thank you, Councilmember. And I'll share that was my understanding too. And so I'll offer two notes here. First, that as an entirely separate matter, and Councilmember Hahn, I'd love to touch base with you about this. I mean, really more than anyone, you helped craft our policy committee structure as it exists to look at if maybe there's some options we should give the agenda committee to look at around the rules for the actions that committees to take. But that's a separate matter. But right now, Vice Mayor Droste is the author of the item, and for the benefit of the public and for the benefit of clarity, if I could ask, is it your intent to withdraw the item from this committee and to reintroduce it for the agenda committee to reschedule given the action we took on Monday?
So I've spoken with the clerk yesterday, and I'm going to be meeting with the mayor later today to figure out the best course of action. I think what was, just to let everyone know, because it had garnered so much interest that we wanted to make sure that the entire council was able to discuss it. And so I'll be talking with him later today. We have an appointment scheduled and figure out the best way to proceed. So that is certainly an option that's on the table, but we want to make sure that we're connecting with our clerk and with each other so we can figure out the best course of action. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And to the city clerk, if an author of an item communicates to you and myself withdrawal of an item, can that happen between meetings so that we prevent something from looking like it's agendized for a future meeting when it really isn't?
Yes, the author is welcome to withdraw the item. We request that be made in writing, by email.
Yeah.
Would be fine. Or it can also happen at a meeting.
Excellent. And I also see you have your hand raised. If there's something else you want to offer, please do.
Procedurally, I just wanted to note that whenever you're ready, I am queued up to play the public advisory.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, we'll get right to that. Thank you.
And just also so everyone knows, we'll be able to provide an answer by Monday. So we'll figure it out very soon. So we'll make sure that everybody knows what the plan is. I just have to speak with the mayor. Thank you.
And Chair Robinson, I obviously think we should go to the advisory, but I do have another technical point that I'd like after that.
Do you want to offer that right now?
Well, I was thinking that maybe we're late on that advisory.
Yeah, let's do that. Thank you. Perfect. Thank you. Sarah, if you could please play the COVID-19 meeting advisory. Thank you so much.
This meeting will be conducted exclusively through video conference and teleconference. Pursuant to Section 3 of Executive Order N-29-20, issued by Governor Newsom on March 17, 2020, this meeting will be conducted exclusively through teleconference and Zoom video conference. Please be advised that pursuant to the Executive Order and to ensure the health and safety of the public by limiting human contact that could spread the COVID-19 virus, there will not be a physical meeting location available. Please be mindful that this meeting may be recorded, as any public meeting may be recorded, and all other rules of procedure and decorum will apply for meetings conducted by teleconference or video conference. To access the meeting remotely using the internet, join from a PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or Android device using the URL indicated on the agenda. Press star 9 and wait to be recognized by the chair. 2 or more council members who are not on the policy committee may wish to attend this meeting remotely. Under the Brown Act, these members are permitted to attend the meeting as observers, but none of these council members may speak or participate in deliberations in any way. It is requested that these members refrain from using the raise hand function in Zoom or otherwise attempt to address the committee during the meeting. If an author or co-sponsor of an item who is not a member of the policy committee wishes to attend the committee meeting to present on their item or participate in the discussion of the item that they have authored or co-sponsored, only one may do so, to prevent the participation of a quorum of the council in the discussions.
Thank you, Michael, wherever you are. And Councilmember Hahn, you're recognized.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so if I understand correctly, not just for me, for the public.
Of course, yeah.
This item is still in this committee. It is agendized for today, but the chair is stating that it will not be heard today. The author may and may not leave it on our agenda. That's a decision that she's going to make during sometime. And so it is still before this committee. It may not be heard today, but it is still before this committee. So is that where we are? Just want to make sure.
I think I follow, strictly speaking. Yes. Okay.
So I just want to say that given the level of confusion about this, the fact that an agenda was published with 4 items on it, that's up to us, right? The city did that, or I don't know who but an agenda was published. And that really I think our first obligation is to being participatory and transparent. I am very uncomfortable asking the good people who came here based on a published agenda, not knowing that we were maybe not going to take some of the items up, asking them to wait until the end. I've never seen that done. And I just want to register that I feel that, again, when we are in this kind of complicated situation where there are questions, legitimate questions and confusion on the part of the public about process and fairness, I think putting the public comment on these items at the end is just, again, I feel it may be technically allowable, but I'm concerned that it will be felt as unfair. So I would respectfully ask if perhaps we could take the public comment on the items that were on our agenda that we are now deciding essentially for the public at the last minute not to hear today, that we do the courtesy of not making them wait. So that's my request to the chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. I appreciate that. And as I noted earlier, I invite anyone who intended to give comments on other items that were agendized at the committee, acknowledging how much the agenda has changed in the time since it's been noticed, to give comment during the time for public comment on non-agenda matters, of which we'll take 10. And I still haven't seen more than 10 hands go up in the time since asking for that. So your concern is appreciated and valid. I think, and I'm not seeing that number climb any higher today. I imagine a number of these comments are going to be about items that were agendized. And so I'm hopeful that that those who came with that intent will be able to be heard. All right, any other housekeeping matters for us? Thank you all. I know it's been a little chaotic. All right, with that, I think we can shuffle along to public comment on non-agenda matters, which can include agenda matters today. We'll take the first 10 hands that go up. I see 9. If you'd like to give comment, there's room for 1 more. And here we are, there's 10. We'll hear first from Karen Shenoy. Karen, you have the floor.
Good morning, committee. Thank you, Chair. This is to item 2, TOPA. We are still waiting for the robust public engagement process the mayor's office promised last March regarding TOPA. We know that one adversely affected organization has been engaged by the authors of the proposed ordinance. However, it is extremely concerning that this engagement is not representative of the myriad of concerns numerous other stakeholders in Berkeley have around this item. And that's especially the minority property owners who are forced by numerous bad actors, including the city, to purchase in segregated areas of Berkeley and are now facing legislation that will dramatically change their rights as property owners. It is also concerning that the limited interaction the mayor's office has had with the public thus far on this policy has consisted of a slideshow presentation without any indication that the authors are receiving feedback or are willing to work with all stakeholders on their concerns. We hope you take this into consideration as you wait with the rest of us to receive updated reports and legislation from the proponents. Thank you.
Chairperson Robinson, you were muted.
So I was. Thank you. Carol Stone, you have the floor.
Hi, I want to address the quadruplex issue. And I live in District 4, not in a single family house, but I've lived in Berkeley since 1973. And I am very alarmed at this kind of presentation, which seems to be in many ways a violation of open government, or certainly the intent of it. Berkeley has long been known for citizen input on land use issues. I attended several meetings when the BART housing issue came up, and there was enormous community upsetness because this was given to the BART board by the state instead of the city. This particular measure seems like a much more drastic action by having an administrator approve with no community neighbor input and no means of appeal for building, when we already have a situation fairly recently allowing the ADUs and people to have up to 3 units on their property. We need a lot more planning and input from this, and a much more open process. So this is a very controversial issue, and we need to wait, I hope, until COVID makes meetings in person possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Carol. We'll hear next from Rachelle. Rachelle, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can. Hi.
Okay, great. I'm Rachelle Smith. I own a single family home in Berkeley near Ashby Bart. I'm here to say that I strongly support the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, and I hope Berkeley will adopt it. I lived in that home for many years. I now rent it out. I understand that some of the opponents to TOPA might say things about small homeowners or small landlords being concerned about how this impacts them. That does not reflect my experience or my approach. I would very much appreciate it if, when I'm ready to sell, whomever is my tenant at the time can get an opportunity to purchase their home. When my most recent tenants departed, I decided to actively make my home available for Section 8 tenants, and that's who's living there now. There are many ways, big and small, that we as landlords can support the Berkeley community, and TOPA is one step. I believe TOPA is a reasonable and appropriate regulation. It's been tested over time in DC. It's well written, it's well thought through. This housing crisis in our community is astounding and heartbreaking. TOPA would support our efforts to increase affordable housing by making home ownership more accessible for more members of our community. I hope the committee and the leadership of Berkeley will support TOPA. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, Rachelle. We are lucky to be joined next by former Mayor Shirley Dean. Shirley, you have the floor.
I have lived in Berkeley for over 70 years, 28 of which I've served in the official capacities for the city, from council committees to planning commissioner, zoning commissioner, city council, and mayor. I have never seen a more difficult and chaotic scene than what is presented by this committee. The only clean way for this to be talked about is for the item to be withdrawn and the many versions of it put into one and resubmitted to the agenda committee or to the city council, and then to take it from there. You do not need to discuss it. You do not need to go to the mayor. It needs to be cleaned up so that everyone can fully understand what they can do to say pro or con against what you are proposing. And I hope you take that action to withdraw the item and resubmit it in a form that everyone will understand and can respond to.
Thank you, Mayor Dean. Appreciate you calling in. We'll hear next from Kelly Hammergren. Kelly, you have the floor.
Hello. There are a number of things. First off, limiting comment to 10 people when the agenda has been so changed is really a problem with open government. What I had planned to say is that the RENA number, 9,000 units, that keeps getting tossed around, looking at the publication from ABAG, that 9,000 number is for 2050. And a lot is going to happen in 2050. We don't even have current census. Birth rate is dropping, which is a good thing because the best thing any of us can do for climate is to have fewer children. We already have 1.1 degree of temperature rise by 2050. There's going to be a lot more. We may not have water. We should have had our major earthquake since that is already overdue. And the ice melt is accelerating, so we should be seeing the sea level rise that is predicted, and those predictions keep increasing. And we'll find out whether our sewers still work as we have sea level rise and the impact of groundwater. So for all this hysteria about we need to build 9,000 units, it seems out of place. That isn't even settled yet, although it will probably be the final solution. I would suggest that all of you watch the movie Push, which is sponsored by BCA and will be shown again next Wednesday. I will publish the link as will BCA publish the link for that film. And I think that's very informative of the housing problem. Thank you.
Kelly, you'll have the link in your newsletter?
Yes, I will have it in my newsletter.
Cool. I'll check that out. Thank you, Kelly. We'll hear next from Becky O'Malley. Good morning. Becky, you have the floor.
I was planning to say a few words on behalf of the public's right to know. The higgledy-piggledy way that the discussion of the quadruplex zoning took place last week is embarrassing to any city who has previously had a reputation for transparency and open government. I was not reassured to hear Councilmember Drosty say that she would ask the mayor offline what we want to do about this and then let us know. That is not within the spirit and probably not within the letter of the Brown Act. If there's a decision to be made, it needs to be made in the full public light. I'd like to reinforce what Councilmember Hahn said about the number of people that are really upset about what they saw and heard from last week's performance. A lot of the letters to Councilmember Hahn were CC'd to me for the paper. And also I got a lot from other people who did not want to go public, but who were very, very upset. I'm hearing words which I'm sure none of us want to hear, like initiative and recall and things like that. People feel that representative government is not listening to them and that they have to take drastic measures to make this happen. We don't need this kind of action, but we might get it if we're not careful. I think that also, I have not heard the people discussing this make a clear distinction between a work session and a special meeting. It's very important because a work session is just a discussion. A special meeting can take action on this matter. This is something that's very controversial, and to try to sweep it under the rug just will not work.
Thank you for your comments. We'll hear next from the caller with a phone number ending in 915. Phone number from a caller ending in 915. You have the floor.
Hi, Thomas Lord, District 2. So we have an interesting situation because the audio recording from the March 1st meeting will show that the chair said specifically when making the motion that it would remove the quadplex item from the subcommittee, that it would move it forward. Today, he says the opposite. So, in a sense, you've confessed to breaking the law by rewriting the motion after it's been voted upon. Additionally, you now say that the idea of a workshop or a special meeting was really kind of a separate matter, in which case you voted on the first on a non-agendized item, again, essentially confessing to a violation of the Brown Act. The least possible consequence of this is the nullification of that vote. So that needs to happen. Separately, more importantly, this is another agenda that doesn't contain any demonstration of awareness of the climate emergency. I, for one, am particularly concerned about the fact that the number of residential gas customers in Berkeley is too large to successfully convert in time, to shut off natural gas supplies in time, to avert an absolutely apocalyptic situation. This is one of the great crises and one of the great emergencies that is definitely coming to Berkeley, and which you seem to be hell-bent on ignoring. So on both of those things, wake up. And a personal advice to the chair, you know, honesty is a much easier course than trying to keep track of and nuance your dissembling.
Thank you for your comments, Thomas. We'll hear next from Vicky. Good morning, Vicky. You have the floor.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Hello.
Okay, hi. I want to speak to the proposal, the inclusive neighborhood zoning. The revisions in this proposal go too far. They'd allow for as many as 8 units per parcel with no requirement for yards or off-street parking. I don't see any protections for affordability. I don't see any protections against speculation. It's really excessive. If things need to be upzoned the R1 up to R2. Make it easier for homeowners to remodel and create duplexes and ADUs. Second of all, this sweeping edict that these projects would be approved ministerially with no review by neighbors or the zoning board or right of appeal is simply wrong. The revisions give away too much control to the developers. Whatever's built, the developers move on with money in their pockets. I guess politicians get a pat on the back for building, but we, the Berkeley residents, have to live with the results. And so we must have a voice in what gets built. We should have a say in how this proposal moves forward. Before the city council passes anything, community workshops and neighborhood meetings should be convened to explain the plan. I mean, this is totally confusing. I only knew that this meeting was happening because I got an email from a council member and jumped on at the last minute. This is all happening in the dark. Voters deserve a voice. Such dramatic proposals require transparency, thoughtfulness, and reflection. If a proposal have merits, have a full discussion so everyone can understand the value, the consequences, intended and unintended. That is my comment. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this morning, Vicky. Appreciate your comments. We'll hear next from Tony. Tony, you have the floor.
Hi there. I have been getting calls and emails, mostly because people know that I'm a historian of Berkeley zoning and I understand it quite well. And this is basically what I've been telling them, that I am a proponent of the missing middle. I actually 4 years ago wrote a column about it, and also for form-based zoning. However, in order for Berkeley to implement the missing middle in the form-based zoning, you're going to have to do an entire year of education. And the reason I say that is my experiences with J. Sissel, which was a total failure. And that's because people simply don't understand, even people on the commissions didn't quite understand how to go about rezoning things and changing things. There's 3 ways that you can implement the missing middle. 1 is division, 2 is addition, and 3 is demolition and replacement in order of change. So with division, if you allow people to divide within their existing footprint and envelope, it doesn't disturb the neighborhoods that much. Addition is much more drastic, especially since people don't understand that in 1991, the council implemented a uniform height limits that really make things outsized. And then 3, the truly terrifying option is demolition and replacement. And people are really very upset about the possibility of this, given the broadside attack on the neighborhood preservation ordinance, which is completely a false narrative historically. That's enough time right now.
Thanks so much, Tony. Appreciate you calling in. We'll hear next from Patrick. Patrick Sheehan.
Yes, hello. I speak as an architect currently engaged in residential projects in Berkeley, including multi-unit projects. As a former planning commissioner, a former zoning board member, and a member of the Zoning Ordinance Revision Project Subcommittee. And that's to say I've been deeply steeped in zoning and planning in Berkeley for many years. The quadplex proposal lacks coordination with the zoning code, the Zoning Ordinance Revision Project, which is currently underway, paid for and authorized by the City Council. The state laws regarding density bonus and accessory dwelling units, which in total allow a quadplex to be 8 units, 4 units base, 2 units at 50% density bonus, plus 2 ADUs. The positive of the state density bonus is that 1 unit of affordable housing would be required on site, unlike Berkeley's affordable housing requirement, which requires no units on site. Duplex zoning already allows 5 units right now, or up to 5 units. Successful planning and related zoning includes all stakeholders, which has been demonstrated in other cities in increasing affordable housing. Instead, this proposal is one of divisiveness, couched in easy slogans and revisionist history, which primarily serve the interests of speculative development and the money which backs it. Along with other speakers, I urge a considered and careful approach to this whole issue. It has much merit, but needs much work. Thank you.
Thanks for calling in, Patrick. And we will hear finally our last raised hand from Carol Morosevich. How are you, Carol?
I support the missing middle. However, as I think about those condos in West Berkeley, and as I have previously mentioned, that they managed to escape providing a below market rate units by having 2 lots with 4 each on it. I also think about the price of those condos. And as I recall, they were something like $1.2 million to $1.4 million. And I have to ask, is this our middle? I mean, whose middle is that? When you're speaking of a proposal to address the missing middle and these quadruplexes, I mean, this is quite an expansive proposal that could change the whole character of the city that's already so rapidly changing. And it needs to be more than ministerial approval, and it needs to provide for affordability and zoning changes to accommodate that affordability. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. That is our last hand, and that concludes public comments on non-agenda items. Before we proceed with the agenda, I just want to offer as a personal note, I made the motion on Monday. I was 100% clear at the time of my intent in that motion, and I still am. And at the time, I thought I was 100% clear on the effect that motion would have. It's clear now that I wasn't entirely. And I think that has contributed meaningfully to some of the confusion around the process. And so for that, you all certainly have my apology. That said, I think we have a clear path moving forward. And if I would make one ask of the author of the quadplex zoning item, it would be just to make sure that documents that were submitted to this committee as part of the conversations we've had already are included as appendices should the item be reintroduced via the normal council process. That'll do. Before we proceed, Councilmember Hahn, I see your hand is raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was previous.
Cool. No worries. We have no minutes to approve today. which is very exciting. And that means we can move along now to item number 3, Councilmember Taplin's item. Do we have the council member or a representative from his staff here to introduce the item for us today? Hi, Diego. Here we are. Let me drag you through the fourth wall.
Hi.
Hi. There we are. How are you, Diego?
Good. Councilmember Taplin sends his regrets for not being able to join, but I have his slide deck for him. Should I share my screen? What's the best way to do this?
Let me make you a co-host so you're able to do that.
Okay. Well, I see that option already.
Good. Cool. Okay. Maybe.
So hang on, let me. It's been like at least a decade since I've done a PowerPoint. Share screen. Okay, does that work?
I see social housing as a human right. Here we are.
Okay.
Diego, the floor is yours. We'll give you 5 minutes to introduce the item. We'll bring it back to the council for some preliminary questions and then provide space for public comments, then bring it back to the council.
Great, thanks.
Excellent.
Well, I want to thank the co-sponsors on this item, Mayor Aharegin, Council Members Hahn and Harrison, for their leadership on these issues. We feel like we're standing on shoulders of giants with you all. And also want to note, while other items are not being heard today, Councilmember Taplin is a co-sponsor on all of them. So we feel these are all great tastes that go better together. So just keep that in mind. I want to thank UAW for their early support, East Bay for Everyone for their guidance, and former Federal Reserve economist Claudia Sahm for her advice. Councilmember Taplin, oh geez. Why can't I go to the next slide? Oh, here we go. Councilmember Taplin wants the council to declare housing as a human right and back that up with actual material commitment to making that possible with a pilot study for a social housing program. The United Nations kind of breaks this right into entitlements and freedoms. And it has to be put into historical context, right? So as historically, the United States has denied adequate housing through racial discrimination and colonialism, we actually need to proactively heal those scars in order to be guaranteeing this right. So before we look at how we can do this at home, let's look at some global examples. So here in Canada, there is the Squamish Nation has a social housing development corporation, and they are building 6,000 new housing units where there used to be a village that was destroyed by white settlers. So it can be a way to, give land back. We want to acknowledge Vice Mayor Drosty's local preference policy that gives us a roadmap for doing that here at home to prepare for the displacement crisis. Vienna, don't really have time to get into that long history, but we like a lot of things about them. So they have a revolving loan fund that we're proposing to study the feasibility for. There's also community participation in design contests for social housing grants that includes future tenants of the development. And we like that because our community processes at the municipal level can easily exclude service workers priced out of Berkeley commuting for hours away, even though we consider them important stakeholders as well. But this doesn't contradict the city's efforts to increase housing supply. As we can see, the Social Democratic Party started a housing offensive in 2016 to increase housing production by 30% by streamlining the process. They've been successful at that so far. This is also happening stateside. State Senator Stanley Chang has introduced a proposal for Aloha Homes in Hawaii. We have included his bill as the attachments for the item, so we encourage you to take a look at that. Finally, in California, Assembly members Alex Lee and our own Buffy Wicks have introduced the Social Housing Act of 2021. We've included that intent bill as well because we hope to, again, stand on the shoulders of giants with their work. There's a few reasons why we want to be looking at this. As our landmarks commissioner Alfred Tu says, starting a feasibility study for a pilot program locally will help us be first in line for whatever the state and the region decide to move forward with this. And we can really prove that if it can be done locally, that we can sort of move that along. So this addresses affordability for middle income households that are poorly served by the market and subsidies. It can be a counter-cyclical program to counteract pro-cyclical market forces and subsidy programs. And we can help local agencies like BUSD and BART that are already leasing public land for housing, but may not have the resources to go as big as they want on that. Keeping the land in public public trust is actually pretty important to that. This is from East Bay for Everyone's white paper on a California housing corporation. We can have cross subsidies here, as you can see, with either higher income households paying market rate rent to a public housing landlord, essentially. And that subsidizes rent for lower income households. You can also have housing at cost, which is Senator Chang's proposal in Hawaii, that can also help with that. So this is intended to be revenue neutral and fiscally self-sustaining. So we hope it will not be a huge strain on services. And finally, how do we bring this back to housing as a human right? So I think an astute public commenter recently observed that if our housing policy moves in the direction of ministerial approval, then what is the point of our city planning staff? What would they do all day? Our answer in a way is this. We believe they should be monitoring the material outcomes of our housing policy. They can monitor cost burdens, displacement risk, segregation, and really align our land use and fiscal investments to meet these goals. There are a few ways to look at that. Obviously, gosh, I'm sorry that Zoom is annoying. Cost burden, pretty easy to measure. We have measures on that already. This pattern here indicates housing not being human right. If housing is too expensive in Berkeley, you do not have the freedom of movement to come to Berkeley. The Othering and Belonging Institute has mapped segregation in the Bay Area. As you can see, parts of Berkeley are highly segregated. And we want to acknowledge Vice Mayor Drosty's efforts to counteract that. This data is also used by the state's tax credit allocation committee and the MTC for opportunity maps. So we also want to map access to opportunity, which means education, jobs, and high quality public services, because good housing should also mean living securely in a healthy and supportive community. Finally, at the federal level, there's affirmatively furthering fair housing, which was discontinued under segregationist President Trump, who loves single family zoning. We hope it will come back, but it ties federal grants to desegregation efforts. And it is, even though President Trump discontinued it, it is required under state law to be incorporated into local housing elements. We can also do this proactively rather than a somewhat reactive process of the housing element. Finally, Councilmember Taplin loves his hometown of Berkeley and wants it to be a hometown for more people. So I'll wrap that up and stop sharing my screen.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Diego. We'll bring it back to the council now for some initial questions or comments before hopping over to public comment. And I'll throw myself into the queue right here. And thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the impetus behind the item and for the vision. I really love the direction this is all going, and I'm especially excited by the legislation that Alex Lee, a friend of mine from college, actually, it's been incredible to see everything he's been up to, and our own Assembly Member Wicks leading this conversation in Sacramento. And so just to be clear, as a sort of very basic preemptive question, is the intent of this this pilot program, this feasibility study, really sort of to lay the groundwork, presuming the passage of AB 387. Is there an assumption or an intent that we would be able to adopt a program like this in the absence of passage of state legislation around social housing?
That's a great question. The short answer is I don't know, but if we want a feasibility study to assess all potential scenarios, right? Mm-hmm. So if the state does not want to do anything about this, we expect a feasibility study to show us what we can do with local resources, and if local resources fall short, why that is. In the item, we also point to a city manager's survey of city-owned lands, and kind of assesses the obstacles they would have to development of affordable housing.
Right.
For a few of those sites, the only obstacles are zoning. So we do think there is a possibility for city development of mixed income public housing. The question is, to what extent can that scale, especially if it's, fiscally self-sustaining. I also forgot to mention, if this is managed kind of as a public utility, it can issue its own revenue bonds. So the question will really be, to what extent can that scale? And we do want a feasibility study to examine to what extent it could be done locally and with or without state resources.
Right. And I'll hop to that 2017 report in a moment, but just so I'm up to speed, has AB 387 been amended since its introduction? I know when it was first submitted, it was just an intent bill, registering the legislature's intent to return to this bill to then insert, what was the exact, the language that would then establish the California Housing Authority for the purpose of developing.
I believe it's still in that stage. There are now companion bills in the Hawaii state legislature to the Aloha Homes proposal that actually identify sites and they're proposing like 80,000 units of affordable housing at a specific site. I just haven't had time to review that companion bill, so we only included the original bill. But yeah, the state bill in California is still in that nascent intent stage.
Excellent. Yeah, which is it is simultaneously important and exciting for us to try to get ahead of what changes may happen, and also challenging to adapt to legislation that it is still at its most kind of skeletal form. But I'm looking to the 2017 report because I appreciated, I think that the framing in the recommendation, the resolution, to look to that report and to, really try to figure out what we can do with these properties. But, revisiting the report itself, I think I'm a little more pessimistic about the outcomes of that report than what you just described. I think it was 6 properties that we were able to narrow down to that really kind of met these well-defined sort of basic criteria for housing developments. But of them, I think only one of which even remotely seems to present a particularly compelling opportunity, and even that one having a lots of strings attached. So of course, we name the Berkeley Way parking lot, which of course is happening. The Elmwood parking lots right on Russell, which is what in my head I'm thinking of as the closest to a real opportunity site. But even there, it's very, very complicated. But the others listed, the West Berkeley Service Center and Telegraph Channing Garage, are inundated with other uses to make it, they're not empty land, waiting to be developed. And then looking to the Bowling Green and the Santa Fe right of way, which have their own kind of strings of challenges attached. Maybe it seems to me that for the most part, that report was a little more conclusive than I think we're hoping it was. Was there particular attention to any of those 6 lots that guides the recommendation in this item around that feasibility study of our public lands?
Yeah, absolutely. So Alfred Tu actually published an op-ed in Berkeley side examining, the potential at the Elmwood parking lot. To your point, we are not expressing either pessimism or optimism at this point. But yeah, we agree that Elmwood parking lot is kind of the lowest hanging fruit, and everything else presents problems. But this is also feasibility study intending to support other agencies such as BUSD, which, as you know, is exploring this at the adult school already. Yeah, we're not necessarily cheering the city manager's report saying, hey, like, look at all the social housing we can build. But a feasibility study just seems like the next step after identifying that potential. And we can already tell that most sites are going to have problems, but we want some numbers on that.
Right. No, yeah, that makes sense. It would seem, I think, for most of the sites listed, we have a pretty well-defined record of what the challenges are for each of them. What I'm just wondering is if, given that review itself has already happened, if really it's more of a case-by-case project to see for each of these sites what sort of a project makes sense. What I worry about is referring a feasibility study of public land suitable for mixed income, transit-oriented housing development that, to me, just at first glance, feels like it might be largely duplicative of the review that our staff already did. Which, again, I wish the outcome of that had been finding a bunch of secret lots scattered all over the place that are just ripe with potential. But unfortunately, that's not the reality in the city. But I do agree. I think that the Elmwood lot is probably the one in particular that presents the most exciting opportunity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally. I acknowledge that concern, and we certainly don't want to call for any duplicative work. We're just kind of between the Scylla and Charybdis of not wanting to be too prescriptive in the initial referral, and acknowledging that some initial groundwork has already been done. I guess when I say we want numbers behind that, we want dollar amounts, and insofar as take those off the table immediately. But we welcome any recommendations or suggestions from the committee as to how to prescribe that.
Got it. Yeah, I'll think about that. And I want to appreciate, I don't think I've ever heard someone use the phrase between Scylla and Charybdis out loud before. That's terrific.
It happens in our office literally every day.
Love that. Looking to the second kind of components of the recommendations around the pilot program, the reparative justice revolving loan fund. I think my first thought here, sort of similarly, is if there were ideas proposed around revenue generation to actually create such a fund, and also a question of what you perceive to be the overlap in the intent of this fund with existing funds that's such as the small sites program, which you're suggesting a revolving loan fund, potentially very different structure, but with what sounds like to me relatively similar objectives, but the reparative justice revolving loan fund being perhaps much more expansive. Anyway, what relationship do you imagine such a fund having to existing funds, and have we thought much about how we would cobble together the monies to really launch a fund like this? And I guess related to that, what is the initial size of such a fund that we think would be required for it to be effective as a revolving loan fund?
Yeah, so let me try to break down that question. We don't want to identify sources of funding until we know how much is required, and as you say, perhaps prescribing the scope of that would make that easier. So I would say, whatever is identified in the feasibility study to start at, say, one site, then we would look at how to do a budget referral for that.
But like general fund monies.
Either that or, Measure P, whatever, right? We don't want to, the feasibility step, I think, has to come first.
Gotcha.
And we can prescribe the scope of that so that we have a better idea, but, we don't want to jump too many steps ahead. The small sites fund, as you mentioned, we envision this as kind of the big brother to small sites fund. So imagine this as a big sites fund. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to bring up TOPA without a Brown Act violation. that's a question for the chair.
So I think, to the extent that it relates to this item, I think it's fine. But I mean, I think the committee has already made it clear that we're not deliberating on TOPA today. So
yeah.
If there's a connection to the item that's before the committee, that's fine. But I don't think it would be appropriate to express on behalf of Councilmember Taplin as to whether or not he supports TOPA, at this time.
Yeah, so I'm not going to make.
Thank you, Chris.
I'm not going to make any substantive comments on TOPA. I'll only say, insofar as the small sites program is envisioned as a fund for acquisition and for anti-displacement, this should work in development, right? So a small site would acquire small sites, but it wouldn't necessarily have the funding, especially not, to issue revenue bonds, to actually bring this to the scale that we're talking about. But we definitely see this as ideally working with other existing funds, and we're very cognizant that we don't want to do any duplicative work.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful. Thank you. And I think one thing that I'm dwelling on with with each of these recommendations is really kind of the steps in the process to what is a titanic but very exciting long-term goal. So in particular, looking just in the precise wording between the first and the second elements of the pilot program. The first leads with, and of course it's all within the pilot program's feasibility study, but the first leads with a feasibility study of the public lands, et cetera. And the second, and perhaps I'm misreading the word choice here, but leads with a pilot program to establish the revolving loan fund, which I think at first, read to me like, moving to establish the fund itself. And maybe since that's still within the feasibility study, your intent really is what I'm describing. I'm just trying to kind of map out the timeline there.
Yeah, I think that's right. I fully acknowledge I have trouble with kind of nesting clauses in this stuff.
No worries.
I appreciate you kind of sussing that out. I would say, the pilot program is kind of self-explanatory.
Mm-hmm.
So, we don't want to set anything in stone if it doesn't work.
For certain. And then to the third, I'll say I'm very excited by this project. I mean, really trying to have sort of a more, publicly facing, housing justice dashboard. I think what I would ask of you as the author is to try to do some inventorying, maybe with planning, maybe with rent board staff to figure out, how many of these indicators are already, publicly reported information or publicly accessible in one shape or form somewhere. And then, what the actual kind of mechanics of putting together a cohesive dashboard would look like if it's a matter of centralizing resources and information that right now are a little more disparately distributed. That's one matter. If it's really a matter of reporting out information that isn't yet something that we're really aggregating effectively or publicly, then that's a whole other project entirely. I don't have a great grasp yet of kind of which of those two directions that's in.
It's a little bit of both. So we are talking to planning staff. And our understanding is there's going to be a work session at council about what planning staff is already doing to evaluate the city's housing policies. So, as you say, this is about centralizing information that may be disparate right now. And we look forward to that conversation with planning staff. This is we're probably also going to be asking for data that is not directly tracked by the planning department, but as we saw, maybe through UC Berkeley or with the TCAC and the MTC. So yes, we do need a further conversation about what is to be included, how it's gathered, how it's centralized. And we envision this as a very first step, and we appreciate you mapping out the next steps.
Cool. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think I'll cap it there for now. Thank you, Diego, for the presentation, the introductory comments, and I would offer the floor to either of my colleagues if they have opening questions or comments before we go to public comment.
I'll wait till after public comment.
Cool. Councilmember Hahn, you too?
Yeah, no, I'm a co-sponsor, and I'm really excited about the really important concepts that are brought forward by this item. And, you know, as with the primary author, I'm mostly listening and really appreciate the good questions, and we'll look forward to discussing with them, you know, what changes or adaptations might make sense in response to your questions and the public's comments. And also, we're just at the beginning here, so I'm here today, all ears.
Marvelous. Excellent. Thank you both. At this time, we'll now take public comments on item 3, the resolution recognizing housing as a human right and the proposed municipal housing pilot program.
You want
like to give
panelist?
What was that?
You want to remove me as a panelist first?
You know, why don't I keep you on? So if we have further questions for you after public comments, we can do that. Hang out with us. Thanks, Diego. Cool. If you'd like to give public comment on this item, please raise your hand. We will hear first from Cece Littlepage. Hi, Cece.
Hi. Can you hear me?
We can. Loud and clear.
Okay, great. Just a few points, couple questions. I assume that social housing is what used to be called public housing. True? Okay, I'll wait. It's my opinion, it's my understanding, first off, that Berkeley has no uniform design standards presently in place. And if that's correct, having no review on new housing will be a free-for-all benefiting only the developers. Budget housing can be beautiful, so what's the fear of review? No public input in these housing decisions is disenfranchisement, plain and simple. That's all for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cece. Appreciate you calling in. We'll hear next from Daryl Owens.
Hi, we here at East Bay for Everyone are very happy to push this and the social housing bill at the state legislature. Basically, our philosophy has always been that we're going to implement successful housing solutions that obviously work in other countries. Other countries have robust public housing construction. They have no single family zoning. It's a very American-centric concept. And they generally don't have things like public housing or social housing taking 2 years of just deliberation to build. I think it was RCD in South Berkeley who said, thanks to SB 35, it only took us 90 days instead of 2 years to get our 100% low-income housing projects built. So we know what other successful countries do, and we're trying to implement the same policies here. And when you look at the most successful country who has public housing, Singapore, Singapore has more public housing as a ratio than any other system on earth, second to Vienna. They have very beautiful, very, in some cases dense, in some cases low density public housing, successful systems like in the Netherlands, Copenhagen, etc. They're revenue positive. And that's really important to understand. The reason why a lot of public housing doesn't work in the United States and has always had such a bad name is because it was always supposed to be exclusive for low-income residents. When a really successful public housing system has collective buy-in, it's much like healthcare. Same problem with healthcare. We only relegate it to the people who are the lowest income, and therefore there's no incentive for the public to have collective buy-in. So in order for this system to work, and we have a lot of good sites, we need to have collective revenue positive buy-in for all income levels. And I think that there's a lot of opportunities to do that, not just with new building, but also with acquiring these old ticky-tacky apartments that are vacant throughout Berkeley that we could get through a small site program.
Thank you for your comments, Daryl. We'll hear next from a caller with a phone number ending in 915. Phone number ending in 915, you have the phone. You have the phone. You do have the phone. You also have the floor.
I have the phone. Yes, I have the phone. This is Thomas Ord, District 2. A fiscally efficient social housing program would not focus at this early stage on new construction, but would instead look at the real existing market and the condition of the economy and focus on acquiring existing distressed units, which is a much more cost-effective way to accumulate units that can engage in this cross-subsidy process. Second of all, the cross-subsidy process only works if there's a single public owner. Otherwise, the cross-subsidies don't scale. That's really fundamental stuff. What this proposes instead is to take public money and public land to do construction projects primarily for private profit. It's a scam. It's a YIMBY scam, and it's YIMBYs usurping the reality of what social housing is about for this fake simulation. I wrote such a plan while on the hack. The city's in possession of it. The authors know about it. I'll send it again to the full council. The other problem with this is that this item contains what should really be about 4 separate pieces of legislation. And that's not really allowed in California. So this thing needs considerably more development. So I would suggest that the authors maybe consider pulling back, withdraw it, and work a little bit harder and catch up. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Lord. We'll hear next from Chris L.E.
Hello, council members and committee members. So I think it should be a no-brainer that the committee move forward with this, especially considering the feasibility study that is as a basic feasibility study and pilot stuff that it's doing. More pertinently, near where I live, there's been several projects that has been getting measure own money. There's like a market rate project a couple blocks south of me that converted to nonprofit and got some measure own money. The Berkeley Adult School, which USD is moving forward with measure own money, is a block south of me, and then of course North Berkeley BART, which is getting some measure own money, I believe. So it makes me so happy that we have that affordable housing money, and it makes me sad that money is going to run out, and it's unclear to me when we're going to get more. So I'm really excited about the idea of a revolving loan fund. I mean, it's not exactly the free money, quote unquote, that a grant is, but cheap money is still really great. So I would really urge looking for ways to maximize that, and instead of necessarily focusing on the initial, like, whatever public land development stays revenue neutral, looking at the entire program as a whole to be revenue neutral, which might mean using the initial development to bootstrap maybe the initial money that goes into the revolving loan fund or whatever capital it needs. But otherwise, I mean, this is great. It's really a no-brainer. I don't really even understand how this could be controversial. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. We'll hear next from Mark Molyneux.
Okay, hopefully I'm coming in loud and clear.
You are. Hi, Mark.
Hello. Hi there, Mark Molyneux. I'm a member of Silicon Valley DSA, but also California Common Ground, a land value recapture organization. I'd like to say this is really exciting. The long-term goal of housing becoming a human right, it's a sibling of the right to the city. And I think this recognizes a big part of it is being able to recapture the value of a public resource, land, and being able to use it as a powerhouse to house people. We're seeing this in many places. Very excited about the Hawaiian bill, very excited about Alex Lee's statewide bill, but I think it's incredibly great and important that Berkeley is leading the way from municipal attempts to see what they can do at every level to make this happen. Land value capture, it's very important here. You look at places that this works. People mentioned Singapore. You look at other places like Helsinki, and people are explicit. A big part that makes us scale and makes affordable housing for people is land subsidies. When you have public land being used to either rent it or have it be lived in at cost, or being able to use to subsidize other units. And as someone said, this is a bootstrapping effort. You can also use these solidarity rents to bootstrap more acquisition. I think that people have say there's a challenge that the portfolio of existing sites isn't as big as it can be, but this is a foundation. We build upon it by acquiring more. There's an opportunity as many private landlords can exit the market. These could become public acquisitions, and these public resources can be used to scale this further. This is a great start, and it's very exciting.
Thanks for calling in, Mark. Take care. We'll hear next from Kelly. Kelly Hammergren, you have the floor.
Thank you. Several things. First off, I've been scrolling through the proposal, and I really wish there would have been a map included in this, and I think that should be added, that we have a map of possible city-owned lands that could be developed. So that, along with the address, would make this a more realistic proposal that we could understand. Something that the city could do immediately is that now that we are, even after the pandemic's over, a lot of stuff is going to stay on Zoom, and we're not going to have the same kind of businesses that we had before. So I think we should really look at removing the requirement for commercial first floor and turn that into housing. And that would, when new buildings go up, we'd get more units right from the start. And I would hope that we look at reuse of existing buildings. So I'm going to stop there with this. One more thing that I wish the city was really looking at is, instead of allowing balconies to count as open space, that we have an open space requirement that as we increase density in the city, and we have more and more of our land covered with buildings, and that we are countering that with developing our parks, and we should have the open space funds go into maintaining and expanding our parkland, which is really an important part of life and maintaining us. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Kelly. And I will share that ground floor residential is something that is being explored in the purview of the ongoing Southside EIR. So we may have an exciting little pilot going on there soon. We'll hear next from Carol. Carol Mrosevich.
I'm excited about this proposal and looking forward to seeing how it develops. I appreciate Councilmember Robinson's pessimistic critical thinking about the number of sites and also the availability of the revenue, especially given that the city's declining revenue due to the pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see how that's the response to that. Measure P was mentioned as a possible source of revenue. Measure P, I'm speaking as an individual now, Measure P is already overextended. I don't know if the intention was to mention Measure O, but they also have a lot on their plate, and they're discussing BART right now and how they're going to finance the affordable housing at BART, and whether or not to put another transfer tax on the ballot. If I understood the presentation properly, it was talking about low and moderate income persons, and that always is of concern to me when very low income and extremely low income persons are excluded. In Berkeley, as of last year, low income was in the mid-70s. So we need to include all the groups, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this proposal develops. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Good afternoon, Victoria. You have the floor.
Hi there. Thanks. This is hi. My name is Victoria Fierce. I'm a local resident here in downtown Oakland, and I'm commenting on this in Berkeley because it matters. And these spillover effects about, if Berkeley doesn't build housing, then Oakland has to pick up the slack. And so I think the social housing is a really great idea. I'm a little confused by some of the other comments that have been made on this call so far about how this is enriching private developers, when in fact the entire point of the social housing project is for the city to own and operate the housing, and therefore it would be publicly owned. I think the city should start getting into real estate development on this. I think about certain ideas from other economists around the world and existing implementations of what's called a sovereign wealth fund, where you have a government body that owns wealth and could own, land, and then turning that into more wealth and more land that can then fund this affordable housing thing. So I'm fully supportive of this. I like the idea. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Victoria. We'll hear next from Joshua Hahn. Joshua, you have the floor.
Hi, good afternoon. I wanted to comment on what Councilmember Robinson brought up earlier about whether this local pilot would conflict with AB 387. That's the intent bill for the California Housing Authority that was introduced to the California Assembly by members Alex Lee and Buffy Wicks. I think if you're eager to see that legislation succeed, then moving forward with a local feasibility study would go a long way to helping build and maintain momentum for social housing throughout California and other places like Hawaii. I'm very excited about mixed income social housing, and I hope that Berkeley will help keep that ball rolling. Thanks.
Thanks for calling in, Joshua. Kiran Shenoy, you are next. We'll hear from Kiran Shenoy.
All right, thanks. Great presentation from Terry Kaplan's office. Thank you, Diego. Loved your work at the Beacon. In terms of the low-cost loan fund, perhaps Berkeley can look at the model being forwarded in Evanston, Illinois, which is the first U.S. city to fund a plan to distribute reparations directly to its Black residents, as well as create a down payment assistance program. But like others, a source of revenue in Berkeley will probably be an issue moving forward with all of these programs. And I just wanted to point out that the presentation indicated that there were a number of areas throughout the Bay Area that some of these policies being explored may be focused on, and those are historically segregated areas. And so we hope that the city, as it moves forward with these policies, respects the rights of those property owners whose family's only option was to buy in those areas. And so we hope that they're treated with fairness and that they are given a voice before moving forward with legislation that may affect them. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. We'll hear next from Becky O'Malley. Becky O'Malley, you have the floor.
I saw a lot of good things in the slides that were presented about the general desirability of social housing, which I would agree with. A couple of things that I'd like to make sure people know. First of all, a lot of the general information, not Berkeley specific, but general information about the statistics having to do with social housing can be found in a new book called Sick City by a professor, I think it's at the University of Vancouver, Patrick Conron. And he feels so strongly about his ideas that he's made the digital version available free online. You can also buy it in paper, but free online is a good price, and everybody should read it because it's full of numbers and charts and things that are very interesting and helpful. As far as what is being proposed for Berkeley, I haven't read the proposal. I'm really basing it on what I heard Mr. Robinson say. But if he's right, we need to perhaps rethink what we're trying to do here. And one thing that I think we should take into account is that in terms of climate change, the most consumption of scarce resources in a climate change perspective are concrete and steel. Both of them are very bad for the climate, almost as bad as automobiles, or maybe worse than automobiles taken together. We really need a program that concentrates on reuse of existing buildings in order to not exacerbate climate change. And also, I think that people ought to I saw last night the movie Push, which somebody else recommended. And one of the things it told me that I certainly didn't know is that all of the social housing in Sweden seems to have been privatized and is now owned by Blackstone Financial, which I found quite shocking. I haven't finished looking up, but we need to worry about that, I believe.
Thank you so much for your comments. Becky, could you repeat the name and author of the book you noted from our friend in Vancouver?
Sick City. The guy is Patrick Conron, or maybe Condon. I'm not sure about that.
Oh, that should help.
There are two Sick Cities that I found on the internet, and this is the one where the first name is Patrick and the last name begins with C. Even
Patrick
though I
C,
actually
Sick City.
read the book, but I can't remember the guy's name.
All good. That's appreciated. Thank you. And we'll hear finally from Eric Panzer. Last call for public comments. Last call for public comments. If you'd like to give public comment, please raise your hand. Eric Panzer, you have the floor. Hi, Eric.
Hello, can y'all hear me?
We can.
Terrific. Well, I just wanted to say that I certainly strongly support pushes for more social housing. And I would say, why stop at existing or vacant or city-owned sites? There are distressed properties throughout Berkeley with residents who are house rich and cash poor. And creating a program where the city both buys out these residents and places them in other social, subsidized, or supportive housing would help get them into safer and perhaps more supportive housing, while also helping prevent the speculation and predatory real estate practices that others have raised concerns about. It's also something I think could win support from neighbors, because replacing just
housing that's not affordable, because that's what gentrification is. So the entire effort of your part should be to create affordable housing. But even more so than that, environmental issues have to come into the calculation. And any decisions that result in tearing down existing housing are the absolute worst thing for the environment. So you really have to pursue policies that focus on maintaining existing housing and using vacant properties. If you're going to create new housing, they should go on in vacant properties. That shouldn't result in tearing down a building to put in, a bigger building, because that ends up being a large impact on the environment, and that's the worst thing we can be doing for climate change. That's it.
Quite right. Thank you, James. Appreciate you calling in. I have a caller with a phone number ending in 457. Caller with a phone number ending in 457. You have the floor.
Hi, this is Sonia Strauss. I'm Executive Director of UMB Law, and I live in Oakland, and I'm calling in my professional capacity and in my personal capacity. This is extremely exciting. Congratulations, Berkeley. I'm torn between, pointing out how legendary and, that this is like, since the U.S. has turned their back on social housing, I think that this might be like the first time, that the city is taking the first steps towards going back in that direction in a way that will actually work. And then at the other hand, I actually want to highlight that examples of social housing are actually completely with us already and successful. So in the Presidio in San Francisco, there's government-owned housing. The housing there is owned by the federal government. And in that case, it's market rate, and the revenues, the profits from that market rate housing that's owned by the government go into preserving the park and maintaining the park. So in this case, I think probably you're mostly thinking of using revenues from publicly owned market rate housing to subsidize lower income housing. But it's basically the same idea, right? That you have that the benefit of development goes to the people, like Mark was talking about, and the people decide how to spend that money on some public purpose. And that public purpose, in the case of the Presidio, is the park. The public purpose could be supporting libraries and schools, or it could be subsidizing other housing. All of these are going to be the wonderful menu of benefits that Berkeley can choose from, as this program goes forward. The question of the redundancy of the studies, I think that this study will definitely not be redundant, because the previous study, I'm almost positive, first of all, assumed that the zoning, wasn't going to change, which is, for the existing lots, like if you assume that the zoning can change, you're probably going to get a different outcome as far as feasibility of different kinds of development. I'm also positive that
your time has elapsed. I'll have you wrap up.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, that's fine. It also didn't take into account, probably like what Eric said, the possibility of acquiring new housing.
Golden, thanks so much for calling in. Last call for public comments on this item. Last call. All right. And that concludes public comment on this item. I'll bring it back to the committee and just thank everyone for calling in, for their enthusiasm about this project. My gratitude for the author for initiating it, and my appreciation to everyone for really putting this in context. Two contexts in particular that I see. Our own domestic historical context and our relationship to public housing over the decades, how that's evolved, and how we can bring some of that energy back, but also the international context and how countries all over the world have proven that these models can work, and really that they should. It's a story I love telling. Back when the CDC thought flying was permissible, I joined the mayor on a sister city visit to Gwangju in South Korea, and we found so many incredible similarities between our cities. That's why we'd identified each other as sister cities. But one of the most striking differences to the mayor and I was that in Gwangju, they have a healthy mix of public and private housing options. And that has been an integral part of their approach and their strategy to housing affordability in their growing city. And it breaks my heart that so many countries all over the world are proving how this can work. But in so many ways, it's a strange, forgotten third rail here in America. So it's exciting and significant that we would really try to re-embark on this work, especially as legislation that can make it much easier to finesse and operationalize is moving through the legislature in Sacramento. So to my colleagues, as we bring it back, I'm wondering what particular scopes of work we would want to see the item refine around before we hear it next. I think a couple things that come to mind to me in particular, there's been a lot of discussion around existing properties, distressed properties, and how to look beyond just the findings of that study we did of our city-owned properties, which again are unfortunately pretty limiting. Secondly, I think some additional conversations between the authors of the item and the planning department about specifically those findings from that report. And really, I think it'll take some parsing property by property rather than a holistic review that's largely already happened to see, for which of these properties is a zoning change really the principal barrier, and figure out how we should tackle that. And maybe it is within the purview of this pilot program. And then similarly, to try to parse out a little more specifically, so we have a clearer referral to our staff about what the indicators are for this housing justice dashboard we would want to work toward. There's a good list in the item, but I think right now it is likely a little too broad to make sure that we get the referral response that we really want and need. A section here names affordability in its entirety, and you could define and measure that in a lot of ways. So maybe that means a conversation with staff about what affordability metrics are already reported, or what we think it would be useful to include in a dashboard that isn't currently publicly available. Those are, I think, my general thoughts. But I want to appreciate there is a significant body of work that's gone into this report already. It's a really impressive vision document that I deeply appreciate. So thank you to Diego, and my regards to Councilmember Taplin. Councilmember Hahn, I see your hand. You're recognized.
Thank you. I just wanted to comment actually on, and I appreciate all of your very positive comments, and also your good ideas about how to refine this item. When you were saying just in your most recent comment that you don't understand why this whole sector has kind of gone out of favor in the United States, when it is so common and so run of the mill in Asia, in Europe, I don't know, maybe in other places as well. But I just, I want to just throw into this that I think one of the many problems around commodification of housing in the United States, one of the issues with, quote unquote, public housing traditionally has been that there has never been a stream of funding to actually maintain public housing. And, I have read some analyses of, what happened to the big, there were a lot of problems with the public housing that was created in the 50s and 60s, lots of problems. But one of the most devastating issues was that there was no maintenance. that jurisdictions, used federal money to put the housing up, of course, tearing down existing neighborhoods, displacing lots of people, not necessarily bringing the same people back. And again, many errors were made, grave, very damaging errors. But the reason why they fell into disrepair is because they were not repaired. Period. And when you have a 12 or 15-story building and you do not keep the elevators going, and so I just think that one of the things people have to realize is that it's just simply our lack of investment and a lack of government commitment to maintaining public housing at the same level as private housing that really was the death knell of public housing in the United States. It's not who was living in it. It's not what went on in it. It is the failure of our governments to maintain the housing. So literally we created the blight and we asked people to live in it. So I just think that's another really important concept that people have to keep in mind, that it's one thing to create it, and I'm really excited for us to do that. But then we have to anticipate how we're going to keep it up, do right by the people who live there. So I just wanted to bring up that additional wrinkle of history that I think really goes to the quote unquote abandonment of public housing, which is shameful. So I look forward to working with Councilmember Taplin to keep moving this in a number of directions that strengthen it.
Right. Thank you, Councilmember. I'm not used to talking about St. Louis so much, but I feel like I've been doing it a lot in the last week or two. Pruitt-Igoe, of course, paints that picture better than, unfortunate. Vice Mayor Droste, how are you?
Hi, thank you so much. Well, I want to thank Diego and Councilmember Taplin for their very smart framework for social housing and really digging into what are sort of the complex reasons why we don't have something like this, not only in Berkeley, not only in California, but in the United States. And so I appreciate that this is very nuanced and complex. I don't have any specific questions right now. I think this is a very good first step to essentially ask those questions, ask staff to come back and give us more information. I think that makes perfect sense. And I'm not sure, Councilmember Robinson, if you are looking for a motion, or was your plan when you were saying that we should finesse something, did you mean here at committee or have it be a further conversation at council? I'll leave that up to you.
I expect we'll hear the item again in committee, and I don't believe it requires a motion to keep it here and on the calendar. But if we have other specific direction or suggestion we'd like to offer to the authors for their work with staff in the interim, I'm sure that'd be valuable to speak into the record. Councilmember Hahn, your hand is raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to state, and it's not really just about this item, it's kind of in general, and perhaps Chair Robinson at another meeting, we could actually agendize to have a little conversation about it, but I don't view the committees as kind of a little quick pit stop. For items, whether they are my colleagues or my name is on them. I am very committed to a robust process at the committee, and I am a co-sponsor of this item, but I truly believe that we are going to improve this item through the committee process. So I am not in a hurry to move items along. And I just think that, maybe that's something we should talk about as a committee. As one of the people who designed the committee concept, obviously it's something that the Agenda and Rules Committee might want to take up as well. But I can say with certainty that the purpose of the committees was not just to sort of have one more, quickie opportunity for input, but really, to ask staff, what is the feasibility of this? How much time will it take to do these studies? How do we have materials already? Has this been tried before? What do we have in place that might, kind of dovetail and support? Is there a slightly different way that we could posture things that would fit better into, the landscape of programs we already have in Berkeley? Where is the money available for these kinds of things? If we change it a little bit, does that make us eligible for some money? There are just so many questions on any item that might come before us. I personally am really committed to the committee process, and I'm really hopeful that we who are getting these very weighty, substantial, transformative items are going to be committed to the work that I believe is the whole reason for having committees. So, I say that kind of in reaction, and maybe I misunderstood Councilmember Drosty's idea of sort of, are you looking for a motion? It just took me by surprise that we would even think of motions on a really important, multifaceted, complex item where a lot of good questions have just been asked, and many more, no doubt, to come. I'm just stating that it is my intent to always try to honor the committee process.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Councilmember. And I share that sentiment, certainly. I think one thing I love most about the committee space, we're able to have much more of a robust back and forth with our staff than is usually practical or possible on Tuesday nights in front of a live studio audience. So it's a good thing. And I look forward to the continued conversations we'll have about this item in particular, which, as a commenter noted, and I don't mean this as a criticism of the item, it's robust. It's really a string of multiple referrals embodied in one very impressive proposed pilot program that it deserves to be unpacked. Chris, I saw your hand was raised.
Yeah, I just had, one point of clarification that I was, hoping to raise for Diego. And if this is not going to be voted on today, he doesn't need to answer it today, but I thought it was appropriate to raise it before the committee. Is the staff report, in particular at page 123, talks about how the intent of this resolution is to really move away from retroactive enforcement of state housing mandates through a private right of action, and rather really the intent is to develop and evaluate policy tools to proactively guarantee housing as a basic right through basically through city policy and through the city's administrative departments. And I was wondering, for the committee's consideration and also the authors, is whether if that understanding of the intent is correct, whether they'd be amenable to including that kind of language in the resolution. And again, I'd say unless the committee does intend to vote on that today, I don't think either you or Diego necessarily have to answer that question today.
I very much appreciate you pointing that out. And not being a lawyer, I don't think I recognize the significant legal significance of that language being in the background section of the report. Thank you. And I would ask that the authors work with you in our time before we hear this next in committee to figure out exactly how to finesse that. Vice Mayor Drosty?
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I was just trying to get a sense of what you were referring to before, but I'm more than happy to continue to talk about this. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, Diego, for joining us this morning. Do we have any other comments from my colleagues on this item right here, right now? Perfect. Excellent. Diego, do keep in touch with me about you and the council members' preferences for scheduling of this item. We meet every 2 weeks, but we are coming up on a recess, which might get in the way of our schedule a little bit. And I think it is our expectation that TOPA will be heard on the 18th, and I imagine that will quickly absorb much of the committee's time when that comes to us. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks.
All right, that concludes discussion of this item, which concludes the action items that we will be discussing as a committee today. But as promised, I will make space for public comments on those items that were agendized but not discussed by the committee in the order that they were agendized. First, item 1, the quadplex zoning item, item 2, TOPA, and then item 4, the affordable housing overlay. So at this time, if you're attending this meeting to give public comment on item number 1, quadplex zoning, please raise your hand. I see one hand. Julia, how are you? Julia Cato, you can now speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can. Hi, Julia.
Hi, I just want to say on behalf of Berkeley Tenants Union that we support TOPA exactly as it is currently written. And we are very enthusiastic about it and intend to work very hard to see that it is enacted. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. And Alicia Carter, how are you? Alicia, you have the floor.
Sorry, I was muted. Can you hear me now?
We can. Hi, Alicia.
Hi. As to the fourplex plan, although I think it has much to recommend it, one thing that is woefully absent and what I, as a West Berkeley resident, am concerned about is that the city will commit to providing the infrastructure that will be necessary if we increase the density of our neighborhood that much. For example, between University and Ashby and 10th or San Pablo and 6th, there's really only one park. And it's small, and it's pretty good, pretty nice for young families, but it's not, it's not like the Rose Garden or any of the parks that are, in the more wealthier neighborhoods. And I think that if we're going to have this much density down here, we need to also provide open space, as well as things like sewage, earthquake preparedness, social services for people who are going to be living in the social housing, just a whole array of items that are just not in the plan. So I hope that the committee, as well as the city council in general, will make that a priority.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Appreciate you calling in. And we'll hear next from Krista. Krista, you have the floor.
Hello, Chair. I just wanted to clarify real quick because I thought I heard you say to comment on the fourplex issue right now, but then the first speaker commented on TOPA. So I just want to follow proper protocol. Which may we comment on at this moment?
You are correct, and I did not correct her. This public comment right now is quadplex zoning, and I'll take up TOPA in just a moment.
I will back off and put my hand up later. Thank you so much.
Catch you in about 120 seconds. Thanks, Krista. Last call for public comments on the quadplex zoning item. Last call. Seeing no further public comments. Thank you. That concludes our discussion of the quadplex zoning item. And at this time, I'll now take public comment on TOPA, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. If you'd like to give public comment on TOPA, please raise your hand. Kelly Hammergren, you have the floor.
I'm
just really disappointed that we are not taking this up at this committee. I saw a presentation a couple of weeks ago on Copa, which was fabulous. And up until that time, I had been sort of lukewarm on Copa. And now I think it's really should be pursued. And so I hope that at the next meeting, this will be a key feature of the agenda so we can move forward. A year is a long time to wait on something that has so many positive parts. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. And I'll clarify for everyone that it was at the author's request that the item was delayed, but I'm told we should expect to hear it at the next committee meeting. Thank you. And Krista, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Krista Gold-Branson, Executive Director of the Berkeley Property Owners Association. We have been working with the proponents and the authors of the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, and I know some of the delays, it has been mentioned here that some of the delays are due to the interactions that we're having and conversations, which we're very appreciative of. And they have been kind to update me on when the expected legislation rewritten from last year will come forward. The first commenter on Copa mentioned that they supported the current legislation, but the current legislation was from last March and is being rewritten at this point. But to some of the earlier discussions had by this committee about transparency and the ability to have time to review items and for the public to truly understand what is being presented and voted on, I would like to make note and let the public know who's listening to this conversation that the legislation updated will not be provided until just a couple of days before the meeting, which concerns me greatly for the committee's ability to properly and comprehensively review this. So it is my hope. We do know that you committee members have stated that you intend to take more than a meeting to review it, but honestly, it's probably going to take a few meetings to really thoroughly examine it. So I do appreciate your consideration on that. Thank you.
Thanks so much for calling in, Krista. And we'll hear next from Carol Marasevich.
Based on Krista's comment, I am very concerned because I would like to make sure that the public has this the revised ordinance before them, so that they're fully informed before this would pass. So as much as I know some people are really feeling urgent about pushing this forward, I would hope that there would be that public transparency and that opportunity for public input. A concern I had about TOPA is not the gist of TOPA, but that the oversight issue, that it be under the rent board, and I have heard of other individuals also refer to this problem, that if people acquire their own property and it is larger property, how will they be able to enforce compliance with laws and regulations? So that there needs to be some oversight with a large rental property. And so I would want to make sure that it was under the rent board. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. We'll hear next from Virginia Browning. Virginia, you have the floor. You may need to unmute yourself from your end. Good afternoon, Virginia.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
Hi, we can now. Hi, Virginia.
I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Okay. Now, I just found out about this meeting just now, but if you're talking about the quadruplex stuff still, are you? Or is that over?
We are not, but I'll allow you to chime in.
Okay. I really think it's important to put in things about open space. However you put density, I don't see anything in these proposals about open space. It's an incredibly healthy thing for people. It's extremely important. I know there are many books and papers written about it, and I've been in the thick of something else, so I'm not going to give a bunch of expert stuff, but I hope somebody else has, and I really think that these guidelines are incredibly inadequate unless you put a huge amount of thought into that aspect. Thank you.
Thanks so much for calling in, Virginia. And we'll hear next from Karen Shenoy.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to kind of echo what I previously said at the beginning of the meeting and kind of work off of what Krista had just brought up, that the legislation will indeed probably be published a few days before the March 18th meeting, and nobody's going to have time to look that thing over. It's numerous pages. So we hope this is the first of many meetings on TOPA. And just to echo Councilmember Hahn's comments earlier, the committee process, we agree the committee process is something where, we hope that these items can be thoroughly vetted, that staff can actually take the time to explore and understand exactly and let the committee know exactly what the policy entails, because the devil's always in the details, and there's a ton of nuance around this policy that I don't think any of us appreciate and could have a number of unintended consequences moving forward. The other thing is that, nobody from large segments of South and West Berkeley have been consulted about TOPA as of yet. And these are traditionally segregated areas that, a big deal has been made of. And it seems strange that, these folks that have purchased in South and West Berkeley, now the city's going to come around and undermine their rights to own property when everybody else has had their turn at the trough. And it just seems unjust on numerous levels. So I think that the city moving forward really needs to explore that before it really considers moving this to city council. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Last call for public comments. CC Littlepage, you're up. You have the floor.
Hi, I wanted to ask if the committee could please publish the next meeting agenda and Zoom link and next door around the city. The only way I knew about this meeting was because of a concerned neighbor's post. So that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Cece. Appreciate you calling in. And with that concludes public comment on the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And finally, we will take up comment on item number 4, Councilmember Taplin's item, the Affordable Housing Overlay. If you'd like to give public comment on the Affordable Housing Overlay, please raise your hand. Kelly Hammergren, you have the floor.
For the last speaker, if you go to the Daily Planet over the weekend, you will see my publication of all the upcoming meetings. I do that every weekend. I also publish it on the website, Sustainable Berkeley Coalition. So as far as finding out what's going on, those are the two places. On this particular measure, there wasn't any definition of how, what percent would be low-income housing or low-income units. And as it's written, it could be 100% moderate. And I know everyone talks about the missing middle, but I figure that a single person earning $91,000, over $190,000 a year, isn't in desperate straits that people who make 30 or 40 or 50,000 are in order to rent housing. And that 91,375 is 100% even AMI. So I would like to see this measure with a supplemental defining what percent would be low income housing. And I'm also very concerned about ministerial approval because that implies that all developers are equal in skill, and having attended many land use meetings, ZAB and DRC, I know that not to be the case. There are some architects who do a great job the first time around and their stuff goes through committee very fast. And then there are others who present projects that just have problems. So the ministerial approval is very concerning. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Kelly. And thank you for plugging your community events calendar. I don't tell you often enough how much I appreciate it and use it too. And for our final comment, we have Chris L.E.
Hello, just not to keep everyone here for that much longer, but I just wanted to express excitement for this item. A little sad it's not being heard now, but I'm just looking forward to hearing it. I'm just super excited, and I think ministerial approval is an absolutely important thing to enabling affordable housing to happen. I've talked to a lot of people on this issue, and it just adds a lot of costs. And I think there's even like some, I don't know, like some affordable housing developers have even gotten stuck. I forget what the term is. It's like Stockholm syndrome, being involved in so much community process. They think that's the only way to do it, even though it adds so much cost to the actual process of delivering housing. So looking forward to hearing more about this in the future.
Thanks so much, Chris. We have one last hand, Nico Nagel. Nico, you have the floor.
Hi, council members. My name is Nico Nagel, speaking on behalf of the Housing Action Coalition today. Absolutely speaking in support of the affordable housing overlay and the ministerial provision therein. One of the great things about a process that is ministerial is setting really great rules up front and letting everybody know that this is the vision that we want to build toward. And that way achieving those goals can happen faster and more efficiently. And that is a win-win for everyone. So yeah, that's my comment for the day. Again, really appreciate all the leadership happening in Berkeley on solving our housing crisis.
Thank you so much, Nico. And that concludes public comments on this item. And oh, Carol, all right, I'll allow it. You snuck in. We have one final public comment on this item. Carol Marasevich, how you doing?
Sorry, I couldn't help it because of the comments about the ministerial approval.
That is your right.
I mean, some things that seem like they're cumbersome are worth the process because of the alternative. It's better to take longer on things and more procedures to avoid an error than it is to make a substantial error. These policy committees are a perfect example. They take more time, but they were created so that you could have extended discussion. And in fact, they allow the public to participate in a way that they never could before by just making a soundbite at a council meeting. And so extended discussion, extended procedures, as much as they may be a headache to some people, they're necessary for the larger impact and to avoid a larger consequence that may be detrimental. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. I appreciate that. And that concludes public comment on this item and the business before the committee. And I'll note, I hope this agenda will be something of an anomaly. It was for a string of unique circumstances for each item that we found ourselves on the day of the meeting with an agenda where we knew that a majority of the items calendared for action were not expected to be heard. And that's unfortunate and leads to confusion. So I'll be sure to triple and quadruple check with authors for future agendas to really make sure that what's agendized is what we'll be hearing in the interest of your time. That concludes the business before the committee. Councilmember Drosty just texted me that she had to run off to another meeting. So it's just you and me, Sophie. I would entertain at this time a motion to adjourn.
Can you just clarify what of the existing items you plan to agendize for the next meeting, or you do not know that now?
At this time, my expectation, upon confirming that the authors of TOPA intend for TOPA to be heard on the 18th, my realistic expectation is that that will consume our time as a committee. And so right now, subject to things being sent to us by agenda committee and what have you, right now, I'll say my intent is for that to be the only item agendized for action at our next meeting.
Okay, I think that's very helpful. And of course, I think I and the public understand that could change, but it's helpful to know the intent just in terms of managing our own workload and for the public to manage its workload and to know what they might want to be organizing to send letters or attend meetings for. So I really appreciate that clarification.
Of course. Yeah,
So
exactly.
with that, I will make a motion to adjourn.
And I will second.
And thank you very much, by the way, Councilmember Chair Robinson, for running a good, succinct, and thoughtful meeting.
I try. Thank you. Would the city clerk please call the roll?
Motion to adjourn, Councilmember Hahn
Yes.
and Councilmember Robinson.
Certainly.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you all. This meeting is adjourned. Take care.
Thank you.